Hi everyone. So today we'll be taking a session on React. Hooked on React. So let's begin and get hooked. So on my screen currently you can see the UI of the homepage of one of the most viewed websites. And of course, Netflix, the most favorite leisure time website, right? But what is something common between all these websites? Can you see the perfectly designed UI UX in these websites? But how was the user interface even possible? I'll let you think about it. Yes, it was React. Now, moving on to what React actually is. So, React is an open source front end JavaScript library for building user connections or UI components. It is maintained by Facebook and the community of individual developers and various other companies. React can be used as a basis for creating single page or mobile applications. However, React is only concerned with the management of the state and providing the nation to its DOM. And that's the exact thing that makes it different from other frameworks and libraries. So, creating React applications often requires additional router libraries and some customer services. It is the view layer in MVC, that is Model View Controller. React.js gives you a template language and some function hooks to output HTML. It is designed so that your program will track states so you don't have to trace program flow by tying functionality directly to markup and packages it in a portable self-contained component. Now these terms, states, components, they may seem a little difficult to understand, but come with me. Throughout the lecture, we'll explore more about React. Not to mention that these features have made it immensely, believe me when I say immensely popular when it comes to web designing, as we have seen in websites like Airbnb and Netflix. Now, I mentioned the term single page applications. What are they? So, moving on to single page applications versus multi page applications. So, single page applications, I'll show you an example. Now, this is a website of Airbnb. Here you can see that, wait, yeah. Here you can see the tiny homes, design, lugs. Now, it may feel that I am requesting the server for different HTML pages one by one, but that's not true. If you look at this refresh button over here, you'll understand that it's not actually loading anything because it's already loaded in it through JavaScript. So it's an application. What's SPA? It's an application that works inside the browser and does not require reloading the page during use. SPAs are about providing excellent UX by imitating the natural environment in the browser. So, no page reloads and no extra waiting time. It loads the web page you visit and then all the other content using JavaScript. Much depends on it. Now, as I mentioned, SPA versus multi-page applications. What are they? Actually, SPA is used because it increases the content load speed because they do not have many pages and load content at the same time. But in multi-page applications, content is constantly loaded, which increases the load on your server. This can adversely affect your web page speed and overall system performance. But sometimes MPA also is preferred more over SPA. How? Because it's SEO friendly. Because multi-page applications are more SEO friendly than single-page applications. Their content is constantly updated. In addition, they have many pages for adding various keywords and meta tags. And when it comes to single-page application, developers have trouble indexing a web page properly and achieving high search rankings. So let's move on to why use React. So one thing that I've seen that I think is true is that uh, many people take up front end development as their first tech stack or skill. So now the thing is that a lot of people learn HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But then why go for any JavaScript library or frameworks when you can build amazing, not just amazing, beyond amazing tools with just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? It's simple. So as you can, I'll show a simple statistic to support this. Now, as you can see, with the increasing years from 2014 to 2016 to 2017 to 2019, you'll realize that React is used more often, right? So many of the websites are now built on React. And if you guys are in second year or third year, and if you want to apply for internships, you know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, it's well and good. But what will add that X factor to your portfolio and build you as a developer? That's simple. These JavaScript frameworks and libraries. So now, since many of the websites are becoming on React only because of its various features, one being that it's declarative. So React makes it less painful to creative, interactive UIs. Design a simple view of each state in your app, and React will carefully review and provide relevant sections as your data changes. Then it's one of its biggest features, component based. Create integrated objects that control their state and compose them into complex UIs. Since the concept of components is written in JavaScript, instead of templates, you can quickly transfer rich data through your application and keep the state out of DOM. Then, one of the very important things I think everyone will agree on is that with React, you can learn once and write everywhere. React does not bother about all your technical stacks, so you can develop new features in React without rewriting the existing code, using Node and the power of mobile applications using React Native. So, yeah. So, I think after all these discussions about its features and why to use React, we can agree on the fact that React makes building complex interactive and reactive user interfaces simpler. Now, another thing is that React is all about components. In the end, user interfaces are about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And therefore, all these components are about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, combining them together and forming components. So, when we work with React, we build components. And in the end, we just combine HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's just the essence of React. So once you combine all these components into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then all these components together, you'll realize that you have built the entire user interface. Now, CSS may not play a bigger role in this, but then it's all about combining HTML and JavaScript. So, moving on to what actually React components are. So React components are of two types. One is functional components and the other is class components. So functional components are plain JavaScript functions that doesn't require render function and take arguments as props and return React component. Here no state is required to render these components, so they are called stateless components. They are basically responsible for rendering UIs. Class components require a render function to create a component and render it. They can implement logic and state and hence are called stateful components. Now, a question arises. Why use functional components over class components or vice versa? I'll let you think for a moment. So, functional component is just a plain JavaScript pure function that accepts props as an argument and returns a React element, JSX. A class component requires you to extend from React component and create a render function which returns a React element. So since there is no method in no render method used in functional components, it actually makes it easier for and the performance better. So functional components are much easier to read and test also because they are plain JavaScript functions without state or lifecycle hooks. You end up with less code, and that helps you with the best of the practices. So I hope components was a little clear to you. Now let's move on to understanding the React file structure. And for that, let's dive into some code. Here, here is an app, a React app. So as you can see, this is app.js. Now in app.js, basically you can write whatever you want your file to have. In app.css, it's just CSS for the app.js. In app.js, you'll have a function, and then at the end, you'll export that function, and you'll have a return method which returns your HTML component. As you can see, your header, h1, h3 header, right? Now, this is index.js. In index your .js, you have to import React, then React DOM, then a React DOM is basically a document object model, but in React there is a virtual DOM used because it takes that real DOM and it keeps it in memory, which is just called a virtual DOM. So now you have to import app from the app file app.js. Then you have to write const root is equal to react dom dot. You have to create that root, and you have to get that root from the document.getElementId. Now in the React strict mode, you have to render that app. So whatever, if the name of this app.js was sigma.js, then it would be written sigma here, not app. So this is the React app file structure. Hope it was clear to you. Now let's move on to JSX. So JSX is basically how you write JavaScript and HTML in React. It simply allows us to write HTML in React. Like I just showed you in the file structure over here. I'll move on to app.js. Yeah. So over here you can see that it returned some HTML. But did it return the exact HTML file? I think some things are different here. Class name, it is supposed to be class, but here it's class name. And further, I'll show you how many other things are also different. That's all because of JSX. So moving on to the four things that are about JSX. So one is that I just mentioned, why is a class not used as an attribute in JSX? Then using JavaScript variables in JSX, then components naming, and then fragments. So let's move on to some code and understand how each of these things work. Yeah. So here I have this. As you can see, this is an app.js and I have various other files here. But one thing that you'll understand is that instead of rendering all these other files like prop.js, state.js, in my index.js over here, I've just rendered app here, and in app.js only I've rendered other files. That's just the way like I want this to go. You can also render example and all these other elements in index.js, but I want that I can refer all these tutorial welcome example from app.js only. So further we learn about the various things. Now get ready for this. Yeah. So this is when you basically set up a React app. This is the first thing that you will see over there. This is the basic the React's own homepage, if you can say in one way. So you can see here I have written react.fragment. We'll get to it in a second. First, let's move on to this class name. Usually in HTML, we write class is equal to app.header. But here we have to write class name. So let's see what happens if I write class. Mm, Let's go to terminal. Yeah, so it gave us some warnings that uh, yeah, that class cannot work. So now you will realize like the second thing is that once I change it back to class name, now the second thing is its variables. All like I'm importing logo from dot slash logo dot svg, which is this basically, and it's coming from this file in our src. One thing that I didn't mention earlier was in the file structure. So when you set up a React app, these three things, basically these three folders come up. One is the node modules, which you have nothing to do with. Then is public, and here is SRC. SRC is where you'll build your entire app, which will have the main things about your app, which is what you're working on basically. So in public, you'll have the index.html, which basically will have this. It'll look like this. And all the meta tags will be here. The React app, it's the name of this app, like it's React app, you can see it there, right? So this will be here, and the script tags will be here. Now the logo.png is also here. So all of the things that you are not supposed like you're not working on, like when you're building the React app, it will be in public only. But then sometimes you'll have to add the html file, add to the html files and js files also, which are plain vanilla js files, so they'll go to public only. Now here we were talking about the logo, right? So I said import logo from logo.svg file. Now this logo is basically a variable name. Now how do you write variable names in plain HTML? You write it like this, I think, right? But here it won't work. It will give you an error. Because in React, you have to put logo in curly braces only. Now, the second thing. First we talked about class name, second we talked about the variable name, and third we'll talk about this react.fragment. So basically what React needs you to do is when it's rendering, if you want to add multiple children, for this I'll show you an example. Let's go to, yeah, let's go here. So here you can see TD is 1, and you will see another child TD, right? So basically the concept of parent and children is that return the HTML file will give you, like here you can use a div tag. Here again you can use another div tag, like the ending of that div tag. So what will happen is Yeah, so sorry. So what will happen is that with the div tag, this is the parent tag, all right. And TD, these two TDs are basically the children. Let's render this tutorial in our app.js. As you can see, I've already imported all these into the app.js. Now I remove the comments and I'll comment out this part. Here you can see A1 and A2 in these are two cells of a table. Now basically they are two children and div is a parent. Now if you do not want to have div because of some class issue or something, it's simple. React gives you React fragments. Yeah. So this will become the parent and it'll replace that main div or any other thing that will have to have as a parent to the other children tags. Now what happens is we move on to the fourth function, which is the fragment part. Now in the fragments you will realize that we have already talked about this. We move on to component naming. Okay. So in the component naming, there is one thing that if you want to name a component, you cannot start it with a smaller letter. You have to start it always with a bigger letter only. Then another thing is that when it comes to styling, I'll move on to tutorial again. Yeah, when it comes to styling, now if you wanted to have, now you can see that in styles I've had two curly braces, and inside that border is in inverted commas, and then I've used this, and then solid the styling is also in inverted commas. Now what if I wanted to put background color? Right. Let's start with it. So, can you see something here? In background color, I haven't used a dash. I've used a capital C. This is called camel case. So in React, we don't use dash when we have to write in JSX. We use a camel case. So next, let's revise everything we just learned. So one was, why is a class not used as an attribute in JSX? That is, class is not used and class name is used. And using JavaScript variables in JSX, that is, remember when we loaded a logo, which was the React's main logo, we used it in curly braces. Then we learned components naming, that we cannot start it with a smaller letter. We have to start it with a capital letter only. Then we learn fragments, how it becomes the parent of the children. Now let's move on to another important concept in React, that is conditional rendering. Yeah. So for that, I'll go to app.js. I'll uncomment this. Sorry, I'll comment this and I'll uncomment this. So here you can say I've written const, that is a constant, student is equal to 12. Then I've created another constant, is logged in is equal to false. What if I convert this to true? That means that a user is logged in. Now in react.fragment, if you move inside, so I have written in curly braces is logged in and then the p tag and ab, and then I have written student. So you can change this to student number 12. Student not logged in. Okay. So now I think it should be more clear because here it is logged in. That is, if is logged in is equal to true. That is, if user is logged in, then you have to display the p tag, which is this one, right? And if the user is not logged in, that is, not is logged in, not true, which is false. So and then the p tag that the student is not logged in. Let's change this to false and see the result. Now it says student not logged in. So this is what happens with conditional rendering. Now let me talk about the syntax a little bit more because you're fairly new to React. First, you have to import React from React, and then you have to start the function name. Now, a function with the function name, and then you have to return the HTML file of that function. Then you have to export default that function name. Whatever function you want to export, you have to write export default that name only. I could have created another function, for example, function AB, and it wrote hello tag hello, and I could have used it over here. So I could have returned it over here also, but uh, since I'm not returning AB over here, only condition will get rendered. So now let's get back. Node.js. Next, let's move on to, let's set up your first React project. So for that, you'll have to download Git Bash in your laptops or whatever your desktop is. And then in Git Bash, you'll have to write this command: npx create React app, and then your the name of your React app. Once it gets downloaded, it'll give you this, and at the end you'll see happy hacking. Sometimes you'll get an error. For that, you can always use resources like Stack Overflow, and well, React's own documentation is very good. So yes, I've downloaded it already because it takes a lot of time to do that. Now let's see React setup. So once your file is downloaded, once you set up the entire React app, you will see something like this. This will be your app.js. I'll, yeah. And I've already added some other files in it, but I'll tell you what files will already be there. So app.css will always be there. Then app.test.js will also be there. It looks something like this, but for now we don't need it. Like I personally didn't use it in this one, so that's with you. Then index.js is always there. Then index.css will be there. Then in index.js, you can see this report web vitals. Here also you can see that it's imported. So this will also be there, report web vitals. And then setup test.js will also be there. Now, if I go back to the app.js, I think I've already shown you how it looks. Now, one thing that I've mentioned earlier also is that React just comes from HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's something that we'll be doing right now. Here I'll show you a simple HTML, CSS page. So this is the HTML, CSS page that you can see here. Yeah. And we'll be converting this HTML, CSS and page and use it in React. So let's go. So first of all, you'll have to you need a main div here, so you have to delete this, and then you can just simply copy the HTML CSS here. So yeah, so here you can see the HTML CSS file for Cactus. Now in this you just have to copy from this div to the last div. But yeah, there are some changes that will be there because of JSX. For example, one thing will be that BR tags won't be there. And like this, there are many other changes, like in image tag also. The font changes a little bit because you have to just add this backslash. That means that will end, right? So yeah, these are the small things that won't be there that you'll find out when you are working with converting HTML to React only. So all the best for that. Now you just have to copy this from div till here, and then yeah, the most important thing, as we mentioned in JSX, class to class name. Now I mentioned three things, that is BR tags are not allowed, image tags needs an end, and class becomes to class name. Now I've already made these changes and used it over here. You can see it in react.fragment. I've made it as the parent tag and all the other children are over here. Then it's the same thing. Now one thing that I did is I imported all the images that I wanted. So this is the variable name, and you can see I've used the variables over here. Here image dot image source will be company. As I mentioned before, the syntax changes a little bit. So here you can see the closing tag as well. So after this, import company from, this is the path of that image which is already in the source file. So you can also put these images in the public folder. In you can create another folder images, but for now I just put it all in the source file to make it easier on you guys. So you have to import the app.css, which is the CSS for this one here. I'll put it in a GitHub repository, and you'll find the link to the CSS and the entire file in the chat box only. Now, with this, I'll show you one more thing. Index.js. Here, instead of rendering app, I've rendered app1, which is this one, where I made the changes. Simply because, yeah, simply to show you guys that it doesn't just render the one app, because a lot of developers have this issue in the beginning that they think it's just rendering app, but it can render anything you want. So now let's move on to app1.js. Now you'll see that there are some warnings that are coming. It's also because of the, well, the anchor tag. In React, it's better to use a replacement for this and not the anchor tag. You can use link tag. Now I think we're good to go with this. Yeah. So let's see how the React file looks in it. Yeah. This is how the React file looks. And if you compare it with the HTML file, sorry, yeah. If you compare it here with the HTML file, it is one and the same thing. Now, one thing that I'd like to show you is that in the React file, if you go to inspect, yeah. So if you go to inspect, you will see this one. But we never wrote this. This is from the index.html in the public folder. Now, yeah. So we have converted, we have set up your very first React project, and we have taken your basic HTML, CSS, and we have made it into a React project. So kudos on you if you were following your this with me on your laptop as well. So now let's move on to a very important aspect in React, which is state and props in React. So, a state is a way to store your local data for that particular component. A state is a plain JavaScript object, and to define the state of a component, we use a constructor. So, there are two components, and in class components, also you can use a constructor, and in functional components, you can also use it. So now we'll go and see how state basically works in this. Sorry, in React. Yeah. So I'll comment this out so it doesn't get rendered. Now let's go to state. Yeah. So in state, you can see I've used a function. First of all, you can see in import React, I've also imported useState. This is a useState hook. So we are using function, we'll use useState with it, we'll not use normal state. So from React, it gets imported and then function example. Now you declared a new state variable which you will call count. And then set count basically sets that variable to a certain value. Now you use state to set it to 0. Now return, which is our JSX file only. So div in the P you have clicked. Wait, I'll render it and comment it out, and it gets rendered. You have clicked it 0 times. Now let's see what happens if you don't use state. If I don't use state and I write it as 1, nothing happens if I click it, right? But if I do use state and I do write it as count, so the times that I click it, it gets changed. How is that happening behind the scenes? Simply put, is that you can see here first you set up count. Now this count variable is something that will keep changing. It was first set up to 0. Here use state is 0, and then in button on click. Now here, this is a React event that on click this should occur, right? So on click, we used an arrow function here. This is the syntax for an arrow function. Arrow function is easier, is something that React gives us, so you don't have to use another function altogether. You can just simply put it here only. Now in set count, you have set that count to, you have increased a 1 in it. So count plus 1. So every time you click the button, set counts gets called, and the count this increases to 1, right? And if you reload this page, it goes back to 0. Why is that happening? Because every time you reload it, it'll get re-rendered. So you state was 0 initially, it'll go back to 0 again, right? So next is props. So props are a special keyword in React for properties that are used to pass arguments or properties from one component to another. Props are immutable and are passed in unidirectional flow from parent to child. Now we'll see a code to understand this better. Yeah. First, I'll comment this out. And from props, I'll render welcome. As you can see, some things are already here now. So to understand this code, first we imported React from React, then we used a function well. Like I have already told you that you can use other functions as well, but in the main function that you want to be exported, the only that function will get exported. Like here you have created a function well, but only welcome gets exported. Why so? Because here you have written export default welcome only. Now in function welcome, you are passing you write div and well, which is this function well, and it has some props in it, so you pass name is equal to mehek, right? So props dot name. When this is done, so mehek gets passed. So instead of this, you can write other names as well, like Anubhav or well any other name, so that will get passed because with this props, right? So let's move on to the next thing. Hope, state, and props are clear to you. These are very important topics in React, and yes, they should be. If you didn't understand this all, because I'm just teaching you the basics. So to improve your knowledge and to learn more, you should go for resources that I'll mention in the last. So with this, let's build a small React project. Your very first project. Let's go. So I've already told you like how to set up a React app, and once you do that, once you do it with npx create React app, you can write a calculator project. So this will look something like, yeah, this. A basic calculator using React, where we use HTML, CSS, React.js for simple arithmetic operations. 23 divided by 5 gives you 4.6. Now understand the fact that there will be some functionality in it that I'll just brief you about a little. Now once I write 4.6, see, I'll go to AC 23 plus 2. Right, I'm not clicking to equal to, I'm just clicking to plus and then adding another element. So what it did was it simply added 23 plus 2 together without me clicking to 0 to equal to, and it'll give you 83 now. Okay, another thing is that 45 point, if you use one decimal, then you can go with other numbers, but you cannot go to that decimal again, right? So these are something that I've added the functionality for, and I'll show you in while the code I'm explaining. So here again we have app.js. Yeah. So we have app.js here, and we have imported app.css. Again, these files will be given to you in a GitHub repository, and you can see this file here. I've imported fonts from Google APIs. Also, yeah, for in CSS, if you want to import fonts, usually these fonts are imported in the head before the body tag for the HTML file. But in CSS, if you want to import it in React, then you have to use at import and URL this. Okay, so now index.html looks something like this. Here also we have imported these. Now let's dive into app.js. First, I have created the main function app. Then I have set, I've used three constants, which is previous and then set previous. Now the use state basically gives it a value initially. So you initially set previous is nothing. It's just an empty string. Then current is also nothing. It's an empty string. Operator is also an empty string. Now the first function you'll see here is const input num. It takes this e, And here's the arrow function. Now it says if current includes this, then e dot target value is equal to this, return nothing. What you mean by this is basically conditional rendering. That means that if it has one decimal, I just showed you here that if I write 12, then I cannot add another decimal. Only one decimal is enough, right? So this is something that happens because of this if statement. Now with the current, you have to set the current to previous and the target value for that. So next, you have to handle the operator, right? I'll quickly show you the return function, which is the JSX part. First, all the header is there and it returns the basic calculator and everything. Now here is our calculator. Now in the class name, it has container class and span class name operator. Now here the operator goes, right? And then it checks if current is there, and then it sees if previous is there, right? Then with the buttons num class, you can see that here on click is equal to reset, which is AC. So this is a React event and reset happens. Let's move on to see what reset does. Reset basically sets current, previous, and operator to an empty string again. Here you can see 25, which is the current, plus 58. Now it becomes the previous, and 58 is the current, equals to 83, and AC makes it all go away. How? Converting them all to an empty string. So further you can say on click handle operator. Here the button value is there, and on click handle operator, we'll move on to see what handle operator does. Handle operator basically sets the operator to whatever the target value is. Like if you click plus, then that will be the target value. Then if current is equal to nothing, then return nothing. But if previous does not equal to to something, then calculate. Like if previous does not equal to nothing, then you have to calculate. That is, if current is there and previous is there, then you have to calculate it. Else you can set the previous as the current. That is the first time. Like when you read for the first time 23, now this is the current, right? Now previous becomes current, and the current will be the next thing. So 23 became the previous, and 25 is the current now. If you can see 23, initially there was nothing at all of them were empty strings. Then 23 became the previous, because sorry, 23 became the current, then it became the previous, and the next current was 25. Then they both gets added because of the operator, which is plus. You get 48, right? Now let's move on to handle operator is done. Now buttons array dot map. Now map is basically, it allows you to map through the entire array. Like it's a for loops kind of thing that allows you to run with the entire array, which is 1 to 9. Now buttons value, which is all these values of the buttons, which I said that it's 1 to 9. So input number will be there on click. If you go to input number, here we have already discussed a point will be taken only once, and here the current and previous will be set. Then if button value is equal to, right? If you click, after clicking 48, you add 8 plus, right? So it gave you 56. Now you put equal to, okay, no, wait. Since there was no previous and no current, so it gave you an n, which is not a number because it's a string. So as we already know with the JavaScript concept, a string and that will not be added. Now 97 is came after we clicked equal to. Why did that happen? Because I'm pressing equal to the calculate function ran, which is basically, let's go to calculate. Yeah, in calculate, we have used the switch operator. Let cal first, then switch, and the operator gets switched. If the case one is, if it's a slash, then it's division. If it's a plus sign, it's addition. If it's a cross symbol, then it's multiplication. If it's minus, then it's subtraction. So here we have converted the entire value after calculating to string, and in the parse float we have converted it to the float value, right? So in calculate this happens. Now button is done div. Yeah, so with this, I think if you understood the code well, this I'll upload in the GitHub repository. So yeah, in index.js again I've rendered app only. So I hope you understood the code well, and with this you will create your first React app, which is a basic calculator using React. You can move on to making it a scientific calculator, or you can move on to make working on many projects like to-do list and stopwatch and many small projects. And soon, when you are clear with your React concepts, you can also try with some big projects like social media app, economics app, and e-commerce app, then bookkeeping app. So you can always keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep growing with React. Now, this takes us to resources. So one of the most important resources that I've gone through in while my journey in React is React.js, React.js.org, which is basically the main website of React. Now React's documentation is so good that you will understand everything in it. So let's go to Google, and for example, if you want to see how state in React works, state in function in React. So using the state hook. So this is reactjs.org only, right? So you will get amazing documentation here and you'll understand it way better. So hooks and function components are there. It also gives you from the basics. So what's a hook? Hook is basically in like while using functions we use the state hook, right? If you're not clear with it, then hook is a special function that allows you to, well, simply put, hook into React features. So use state is basically you hook into the state function of React, and that's it. You will get use state in there. Now declaring a state variable, like everything is there. Even if you want to go with uh, props in React, then components and props are also very detailed over here, rendering a component and everything. Will give you resources itself. So it becomes very easier to go with this documentation of React only. Like here you can see in function sum a comma b, it passes a plus b, function withdraw count comma amount, right? So another source is this https github.com, and this is a React Redux links. So I have taught you the basics of React with state and props and conditional rendering, JSX and everything. But there is a lot in React left, and React is not just this simple React, it also has Redux in it. Then you can also move on to React Native, which is for the mobile applications. So there are a lot of things in React. If you want to talk about Redux, then I'll give you a basic overview. Redux is basically it helps you better with state management because of its cycle. You can see Redux in React. Uh, yeah, it will give you this. React Redux is another website for documentation. It starts with using React app, then with hooks. You have to, it's pretty similar to it, but then there'll be very small things that will be different. Like in Redux, you'll have uh, store and actions and reducers, which are pretty complex terms. But when you get to it, React is very simple and easier to learn. So keep learning, keep growing, and don't stop at only these resources, and don't stop at these basic knowledge. Keep implementing React apps and keep developing your own portfolios with React, because React is something, once you know the basics also, you can keep developing, you'll keep learning while you're developing different things. And one funny thing that I just realized is that I have used Canva for this, and Canva is also made on React. Here I have this extension on my laptop which gives me which tells me if a website is made on React. So yeah, this is all. If it's blue, then it's also made of React. You can also download this extension and explore more with React. Now, with this, I think, thank you. I hope with this session, I got you hooked on React too.